you just like if you really want to get smarter as an NBA fan or as a basketball fan, just watch Draymond Green defensively. He is so much smarter than almost everybody else on the court. The rotations he makes, the stunts he makes, the help, like he is the definition of a one-man defense. And look, I know I'm a bit more extreme on this than you are. And we both love Steph Curry, but I truly believe that the foundation of the Warriors is actually built around both of them. And I do think that Steph, of course, historically is better than Draymond Green. Like I think Steph Curry, I have him in my top 10 of all time. I think he's one of the greatest basketball players to ever live. But in the modern age where the talent pool has become so large and it's just harder for one really good player to win on his own, I'm not sure the Warriors have near the success they do if Draymond Green doesn't become the player that he does. And I think that maybe not just as important as Steph Curry, but I just think what he does for the defense is as singularly unique as what Steph Curry has done for the Warriors offense. And he's showing it again this season. He's just been fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable point. Yeah, you're right. It does go a little bit further than where I would go, like just because, and the reason is not because of what you're saying is not true. I think it is true. I think Draymond Green is one of the greatest defensive players of all time in the NBA. You could argue for him as being the best, honestly, the greatest. And I agree.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. There is a very reasonable argument that he's the most impactful defender in the history of the NBA.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a credible argument for that. At the same time, just the reality in terms of how the NBA works is that offense is just more important than defense, at least where we are right now and where we have been historically, especially recently. And so because of Curry's offensive impact, it just makes him a more valuable player.
Can I ask you a question about the statement you made? Because you kind of said it like it was a fact, and I just kind of want to play the devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah.
So, you said offense has been more important than defense, and I think I would agree with that. I would have definitely agreed with that 10 years ago. Is it possible that with the rule changes, with the influx of offense, with all the talent that we have, that the uniqueness of a singular defensive presence like Draymond Green actually makes defense more valuable than offense? Or excuse me, a player who impacts defense like that more valuable than a player who impacts offense like that, just in the sense of it's actually easier to get a guy who's really good at offense than it is to get a guy who's really good at defense?
Well, to me, those are two different questions. So is it easier to get a guy who's really good at offense than a guy who's really good at defense? Probably. But we're talking about at the highest levels. We're talking about like the best offensive impact players in the game versus the best defensive impact players in the game. And when you go to the highest level, like you can't impact defense as much as you can impact offense. And that's why like there's just a ceiling on how much you can impact defense because you're one person and you can't say, hey, I'm going to take everybody one-on-one. Like if you could stop the game and say like, we're going to have our defensive player match up with whoever has the ball every time the ball moves to someone else, then defense would be more impactful and more important potentially. But the fact that you can't, like I can just go away from Draymond if I want and he can just not be involved in a play makes it so that he cannot be more impactful than the most impactful offensive players in the game. So for instance, Steph Curry impacts every single offensive possession just by virtue of his gravity. And then when he has the ball, he's making decisions. You could run things through Steph as much as you want. You can't do that defensively.
You just created defensive gravity though.
I did, and I was thinking about it as I was saying.
If Draymond Green's singular presence is forcing you to be like, we're good, like in a Darrelle Revis way, like we're just going to go to the other side of the court, you are impacting just by that. You're taking away half the court.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it works quite that way. Like, so for instance, taking away half the court, I don't think it necessarily works like Draymond Green is taking away half the court. I think he's impacting the defense in this broader way through like defensive gravity, as you suggested. It's almost like weird because it's like the opposite of gravity when you're on defense, because you're like pushing away. I don't know what term that would be. There's actually no force that's like oppositional to gravity. I don't know if you know that, Geoff. But I had looked into this one time. There's nothing.
Isn't it just called zero gravity?
Yeah, but that's not an oppositional force. That's like the lack of gravity, right? Like that's. But anyway,
it's like the opposite of lube. It's what is defensive lubricant? What is
friction?
Defensive friction.
Defensive friction is interesting. Yeah. When
we're huge, huge in 3 years, these are going to be great things to flash back to. Like these conversations. Can I tell you just a fact that
sure.
I'm not going to say it's going to change your perspective, but it is.
Okay.
I do find it kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So the Celtics, Thunder, T-Wolves, Cavs, and Pelicans are the top 5 teams in the NBA in net rating right now, currently. They are, in order, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 6th in defensive rating.
Yeah, go ahead. You can finish.
I guess I'm not drawing any conclusions. I guess I feel like it's just possible that defense actually has it might be more important to be a really good defense than to be a really good offense today, just because of how offense is everywhere, man. Like that's just what it is. Like that everyone knows to shoot threes, and yeah, you need one of the best offensive players. You're gonna need that, but everyone is creating good offense through the influx of analytics and smarter shot mapping. I just think that's so much more prevalent than defenses who are playing 48 minutes. It's possible that it's actually more valuable than ever to be a really good defense.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to that, and especially in the context that you're describing it. But I just want to be clear that this is like a separate question from the one that we were just talking about. We were talking about an individual player's defensive impact versus an individual player's offensive impact, and then what you just talked about was a team's defensive rating versus a team's offensive rating. So like, even if I were to grant
but an individual defensive player helps the team's defensive
right
rating.
But they can't help it as much as an individual player can help the offensive rating. That's the point. Like, that's what I'm talking about. We're talking about an individual's impact. So even if I were to grant you, like, yes, it's more important to have a great defense as a team than it is to have a great offense as a team. If I were to grant you that it wouldn't then follow that like it's more important to have the highest impact defensive player than the highest impact offensive player. Because, so for instance, we look at EPM and we sort by defensive EPM. The highest impact defensive EPM player is plus 4.0, which is actually Isaiah Hartenstein, which is hilarious. And what that means is, if we control for all of these variables, we're estimating that Hartenstein's impact on defensive rating is 4 points per 100 possessions. That's what that number actually means. And if we sort by offensive impact, then we find that the highest number we see is Nikola Jokic at plus 7.8. So almost double in terms of the actual effect towards the outcome. So because Isaiah Hartenstein can be involved in a ton of plays because he's protecting the rim, and oftentimes you're going to go to the rim if you're the offensive team, he can affect a ton of defensive possessions and creating all of this great impact. But we're seeing it cap out at like plus 4, right? But on offense, I could run everything through Nikola Jokic. So we're seeing it cap out at closer to plus 8. So despite, let's say defense was more important, the best defensive impact player is not going to be as valuable as the best offensive impact player.
Is it possible that EPM isn't fully capturing that? Like, let's say Knicks opponents just said, like, Isaiah Hartenstein is the best rim protector we've ever seen. We're not going near him. And then they just took nothing but contested threes for the entire game. Is it possible that defensive EPM wouldn't fully capture the impact that Isaiah Hartenstein is having?
I mean, possible it wouldn't fully capture it, but not possible that it wouldn't pick up on it. Like, that's what defensive EPM is trying to capture. It's trying to say, when this guy's on the court, what's results? Like, what are the outcomes now that we see defensively? So if Isaiah Hartenstein was the best rim protector ever, a Rudy Gobert type player or like a future Victor Wembanyama type player, then defensive EPM would capture that. They would say, oh, when this guy's on the court, the whole shot diet changes completely, and the opponent's team's offense is terrible. And then his defensive impact would be through the roof. And actually, currently it is through the roof, which is only a +4 because you can only do so much as an individual defender in terms of affecting the opponent's offensive possessions. And that's just like the reality of how things are right now. Maybe a player like Wemby will change that, and we will see a +8 defensive EPM. I wouldn't be shocked to see it, like, honestly, from a guy like Wembanyama who is already at a +3.2 in his 20-year-old rookie season.
Dude,
and
he's unreal. Like, he has a 10% block percentage and over 30% usage. That's impossible. Nobody's ever done that.
Impossible.
Has anybody ever? Did Hakeem ever do that? I'm trying to think of anybody who could have done that.
I don't know. We'd have to look back at it, but I'd be shocked if anyone's ever done that. Yeah.
Like, he's basically a one-man offense for this terrible team. And then on the other end, he's like treating opponents like they're kids on a playground. Like, it's like, did you see the block from last night where he didn't even jump?
Yeah, and he just snatched the ball. Yeah.
He just like turned around and like reached his arm out. I was like, dude, go away. You know, like, oh my God. He
also is at a 30% defensive rebounding percentage, by the way. Which,
yeah, that was the concern for him, right? Like, it was like, he's too fragile. He's gonna get. Nope. He just vacuums every single rebound.
This was the same game where he had that block where he literally like turned and just saw a small human to him, and then just like reached his hand out and just said, "Oh no, I will take that, thank you." That's the same game where he did a dribble combination crossover on who was it? It was on Kyle Anderson, a dribble combination crossover on Kyle Anderson to a step back to a fading three that he hit while he wasn't looking at the basket as it went in. So this is in that same game. So, Wemby's a whole different ball game. Like, again, like I said, I could imagine Wembanyama having a +7 defensive impact or something in something that we've never seen before. But that would be because he is like essentially like cutting off half the court, or like essentially like making the rim somewhere you can't go. But right now you can't really do that. And one of the reasons you can't do that is because of the prevalence of 5-out offenses. So you can't just say, hey, I'm going to shut down the rim. Like, these teams have all kinds of techniques that they try to implement. Like, look at the Celtics, to try to keep their rim protectors at the rim. But you have to like really try to keep your rim protectors at the rim. You have to play Porzingis on a non-shooter. You have to have him, you have to pre-switch to get guys so he can not be involved in pick and rolls. Like, yeah, you have to put him in a drop and like, you can't just say, I'm going to plant my guy at the rim and you're not going to be able to score. If you could do that, then it'd be a different story, but you just can't. And then if we have a 5-out offense, then you literally can't. So you'd never be able to have that same impact against a team like OKC. If you have like the greatest rim protector of all time is still only going to be able to do so much against a team like OKC, or another team that has a 5-out offense. So, so for those reasons, I just don't think that Draymond Green can even like definitionally be as valuable as Steph Curry has been. But I do think he is the corollary in terms of offense and defense. And I totally agree. I mean, clearly the second most valuable player to those championships and all that stuff as well.